because there's rumours afoot that there might be some desire, shall we say, to integrate ourselves slightly more closer with the EU. I talk specifically about a youth mobility scheme, which would essentially see people under 30, so you just miss out, I'm afraid, Ben Habib, whether or not they should be able to be free to live and work in the EU and vice versa. I have to say, there's been some strong denial that this is a plan. Take a listen to this.
Is the government considering an EU mobility scheme for those under 30?
As we have said multiple times, we have no plans to introduce an EU youth mobility scheme.
A very strong denial there. I'll leave it up to you guys to work out whether or not you believe that. Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe. I mean, I think this government is ideologically committed to taking us as close as possible to the EU. And if they could get away with it, they'd take us back in and they'd give up our currency, they'd give up our borders to freedom of movement, and they'd give up self-governance. And that's why I say that people like Starmer, who are so enamoured by the EU, are basically anti-British, because if you give up your currency, your borders and your governance, what are you? You're not standing up for the United Kingdom, are you?
But then do you think we should have such a scheme that the young...
Sorry, I've moved on from the scheme. I mean, no, I don't. I mean, look, we have arrangements with Canada and New Zealand which are similar, you know, but it's done with visas. With Canada and New Zealand, there's no risk of them wishing to govern our country and to, you know, have their boot on our neck. But with the EU, we're dealing with a mercantilist, expansionist, semi-imperial power. We've got to be very careful what we do with the EU. The EU is no friend of the United Kingdom. We've seen that over the last few years as we tried to implement a democratic vote of the British people. They have stood in opposition to us. They've said the price of Brexit, the price of your temerity to leave the EU will be Northern Ireland. They've forced successive governments to take the knee to EU regulations. We can't treat the EU as if it's some kind of benign neighbour. The EU is antipathetic to our country, and it's high time our politicians stood up to it.
Ben, you're such an isolationist. I mean, we both share a background in voting the EU out of controlling our...
I'm not an isolationist.
Money and trade. Well, in that tirade, you came across as one. Look, I think let's get some facts into this conversation. First of all, this isn't a proposal of the British government. It's actually a proposal that Ursula von der Leyen tactically made in April of this year, just obviously before the general election. It was a pretty gold-plated proposal, and I think there are people watching this and listening to this on radio who will say, hold on a minute, wasn't it Michel Barnier back in 2016?
She's even dressed like the EU flag there.
Well, there you go. You know, wasn't it Michel Barnier back in 2016 who said no cherry-picking? This is the EU cherry-picking our labour market. One of the proposals from von der Leyen, for example...
She's pulling us back in, Tom.
Was, well, pulling us back in on terms that meet their needs as a political class in Europe. So, as I say, one of the things they want to get out of us is to give EU students the home fees student rate, when our universities are already struggling with the £9,500 they charge for our domestic students. If that had been uprated with inflation, it would be about £13,000 a year for tuition fees. And they want it to be a 4-year scheme, whereas we all know, if you stay in this country for 4 years, a 28-year-old comes here on a youth mobility scheme, I would support that. 3 years in, they have a baby. On the 4th year of the visa, they're not going to be sent home, whether or not the visa itself is terminated. So, in my view, as it's currently proposed by the EU, not by the British government, this is freedom of movement by the back door. However, for those of our young people, I've benefited from working in Spain over a summer. I bet there are other people watching this who've had that kind of experience. I would not want to deny that opportunity to our under 30-year-olds who might want to go for a year, or maybe they're a travelling performer. There have been issues around those people, for example, getting access to the EU. Maybe it's over a winter and you're working at a skiing resort. British young people should get that opportunity, but it should be on terms that work for us. So it should be a cap scheme. In my view, it should be only 1 year. And importantly, a youth mobility scheme does not give you access to our higher education fees system. You should pay the rate, the going rate that everybody else pays who comes from outside.
But I thought you could still go and work in the EU. If you've got like a job offer or your work permit or whatever, I thought you could go work there.
Yeah, you can get a work visa. I mean, we're a third country now to these EU countries. And of course, we have been talking, I think, to Germany and Spain about introducing a similar scheme to New Zealand and Canada. It is a visa scheme.
The way people talk about Brexit and how you've robbed the young people of their futures. I think you do realise you can still travel to Europe, you can still go and work in Europe, you can go and marry a European, you can do what you want, quite frankly, but we just have kind of frameworks around that now.
You can, but there have been examples, for example, literally one man and one woman bands who want to go and perform in Paris or Berlin or somewhere else, and they can't go and do that because they don't have, the paperwork that needs to be completed in order to do that. Just for a one-off gig, it might be fine if you're going for the summer.
Yeah, do the paperwork.
I think you can look at ways of, as I say, this is about mobility.
Come on, we're milking it a little bit, aren't we? We've got to rejoin the EU or thereabouts because someone can't fill a form.
But to be fair, and I think it's really important, we don't mislead viewers here, Michelle. This isn't about rejoining the EU. It's not even about freedom of movement. However, I think the way in which the EU is proposing the scheme, frankly, come on, pull the other one.
But Tom, you do agree that Starmer is an ardent, unreformed Europhile, that he wishes to take us as close to the EU as possible, if not back into it. You do agree with that, don't you?
Well, I have to agree with it, Ben, because I left the Labour Party after 27 years because Keir Starmer joined the People's Vote and called for a second referendum and turned his nose up at 5 million Labour voters. Yeah. That is a fact. That is in the past.
So we've got to watch this government very carefully.
We have to watch them carefully, but we also do have a Prime Minister who has made it a red line that we're not joining the EU, we're not going back into the single market, which includes freedom of movement, and we're not joining the customs union.
Except he was caught on camera in Montreal when he thought the camera wasn't on him, saying, I will align the UK as closely as possible to the EU.
Well, that's a fact of life. As you well know, as someone that's campaigned hard against the Irish Sea border and the Windsor framework, the truth is, because of that framework, you know this better than most, we are aligned already with a lot of single market rules.
Well, Boris Johnson never gave us Brexit.
Because we have this choice. In Great Britain, we can either diverge from Northern Ireland or we can stay close to EU rules, even though we don't have to, in order to ensure that trade is unfettered.
Well, that's the grappling hook.
That's nothing to do with Keir Starmer.
That's Boris Johnson.
Exactly.
And that's the grappling hook of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And that's why the protocol is damaging to the entire United Kingdom, not just Northern Ireland. Anyone listening, vote against the protocol at every opportunity.
Jess, she's watching, and she says, actually, Michelle, a youth mobility scheme sounds like a good idea to her. She says, let's be honest, young people didn't support Brexit, so why not allow them to now work, live and love in different countries? I don't think there's any rules saying you can't love someone from a different country. I just got to add that in there. Ian says, Michelle, the British youth, can you tell them that travel is good for the soul? There you go. Passed your message on there, Ian. Michael says, Michelle, it's time for another referendum. The country,
God, please.
The country looks very different, Michael says, to what it did in 2016. You just got mass groans there, Michael. I've got to put, you might have heard that, I think. Well, I don't know. Many of you at home, obviously Michael's one of them. Is there anyone else out there that thinks that we should have a second referendum or not? Matt says, as everyone forgot, we seem to have some kind of population crises, and it's only going to make the problem worse. Kizzy, you've just been in touch as well on Twitter, bringing this back to the workforce conversation we were just having. You're saying about people bashing employers, she means you, Tom, about people bashing employers, saying that all of these employers are addicted to having their employees' wages topped up by things like universal credit. She says, I've got employees on universal credit and I would love them to work for more. They're great employees, but they don't want... No, listen to what they say. This person, I'm assuming you're a woman, but I don't know. You then say they don't want to work extra hours. Why don't they want to work extra hours, Tom Burek? Because they will lose their benefit. And this cannot be right. There's no sane-minded individual that would think that that is right. So she's or he's sticking up for the employers there and exactly making that point. Is it 16 hours or something like that? And it starts to taper down. It's absurd. Anyway, lots of you getting in touch as well and saying that this ageism is absolutely a thing as well. Lots of you are saying that you've experienced it. You're being told, essentially, when you try and go for jobs that you're too overqualified. Some people are saying that they're trying to, dumb down, if you like, some of their qualifications, but they don't want to end up in a situation where they have to go right back to the start and do minimum wage jobs. Is that your experience? Get in touch and let me know.